Hello, thank you for joining me here today at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I am talking about The Player by Michael Tolkien, released in 1988, and the movie is also called The Player, directed by Robert Altman, and released in 1992. And this is the first video for Subscriber September. So I'm planning on covering A Haunting in Venice, so that is a new release, not a subscriber pick. But aside from Haunting in Venice, all of the book versus movie episodes I do this month are ones that were requested by my subscribers in a community post that I made. So thank you to everyone who submitted different suggestions. I really appreciate it. And The Player was suggested by Desirelessness JF, whose name is Johnny. So Johnny, I would love to hear your thoughts on this down in the comments on why you picked this one and how you like my episode for it. And this was a fun topic because it deals with the movie industry and producers versus writers kind of a thing. And as of the time I'm recording this, there is still a writer strike going on, writers and actors strike. So it was just very fitting to read this book and watch this movie while all of this is going on in the industry, so it was very timely. But to get into the book review, so Michael Tolkien worked in Hollywood, so he definitely has that, inside perspective on what it's like to try to get something made. And the book is just, it has a very jaded look when it comes to Hollywood and, the studios and the producers. But it was also just very entertaining and funny. And I went into this knowing nothing. And there's a big part of the plot that I was shocked by because I did not see it coming. So as someone who went into it knowing nothing, there were things about it that I was just very surprised by. And it definitely kept me on my toes. So this is one I would definitely recommend to people who enjoy reading, but who also enjoy movies. I love books that relate to movies because it combines two of my passions, But I also think this would be a great one for anyone who wants to become a writer in Hollywood. I feel like they would also be able to relate to this on a more personal level. And on to the movie review. So the screenplay was also written by Tolkien himself, and so it is very close to the book. And Tim Robbins is in the lead role. And this is an early-ish role for him. It is before Shawshank. It is before his Academy Award-winning performance in Mystic River. But yeah, he is such a highlight here, and his performance is fantastic. And we also, because this takes place in Hollywood, we also have a lot of cameos by different actors. And so that was always just really fun, just seeing these actors playing themselves. And some cameos are funnier than others, but it was just entertaining to see all the different actors who chose to make an appearance in this movie that was making fun of the industry. And the movie itself, the critics really loved it and it got a lot of Oscar nominations, despite it being such a bitter, negative take on Hollywood. And Altman even said to Tim Robbins at one point that I think we were too nice to Hollywood in this film because it should not be this successful. And sometimes when movies like this are popular with the industry is making fun of, sometimes I'm do these producers and studios, did they actually like the movie? Or do they just want to be oh, we need to show that we can laugh at ourselves. So we need to make sure this gets Oscar nominations and we need to act like we're okay with this, even if we're not. So I always wonder if there's ulterior motives and they just want to make it seem like they have a sense of humor, but if deep down they actually are bothered by it. I don't know. But on Letterboxd, this movie has a lot of 4 and 5 star reviews. I personally gave it a 3.5 because, I don't know, there were just times where I just wasn't fully engaged in the movie. And I do think having read the book, it kind of detracted from the movie experience because I knew what was going to happen. Where, like I said, the book, it kept me on my toes because I was wow, I don't know where this is going to go. But the movie, I knew where it was going to go. So I feel that affected my viewing experience. But I will say, I could see myself giving this a higher rating upon a rewatch. So even though it's a 3.5 now, I could see myself potentially bumping it up to a 4 in the future because I did really like it. It just wasn't as engaging as I had hoped it would be, I guess. But nonetheless, I would still recommend the movie as well, and for the most part, I did like it a lot. But from here on out, I will be getting into the details of the plot, which means there will be spoilers going forward. So starting with our main character, his name is Griffin Mill, and he is a producer. And right from the start, we find out that he has been getting threatening postcards from a writer who he said he would get back to, but then he never did. And Griffin says that he will get back to every writer he sees, every writer who comes in to pitch an idea. That's what he says to them to get rid of them, right? And most writers catch the drift and realize that he doesn't actually mean it. But this writer thought he really would get back to him, and then he never did. And so now this writer is sending him death threats. And on top of that, Griffin, there is a position opening up, and he's hoping to be promoted into this position. However, his job is being threatened because some new guy was hired, and it seems like this new guy is also vying for this higher position. So he's got these death threats, plus he has his job being threatened. And in the movie, we don't see like the name of the studio he works for. I think maybe it's like a made up studio. I'm not quite sure. But their slogan is movies now more than ever, which is like such a ridiculous slogan. And so that was very funny. And I definitely got a kick out of that. And that was not in the book at all. In the book, they use like actual studios that he's working for. I don't remember what it is in the book, but yeah, in the movie, they never specifically say. But I think it's just a made up one because no studio actually has a slogan like that. And then in the movie, Griffin is dating Bonnie, who also works at the same studio as him. And so they were always around each other and their relationship seems to be going well. And this is a big change because in the book, Bonnie, she does not actually work with him and their relationship is actually starting to fizzle. And it's on both ends where they just haven't been prioritizing seeing each other. And so they're just not as serious about each other in the book as they are in the movie. But eventually Griffin has had his fill with these postcards he is receiving. And so he decides to go through his calendar and see what writers he has met with lately, like within the last month or two, that he has not gotten back to. And he kind of just randomly picks one. He picks this guy named David Kahane. And in the book, he doesn't think David Kahane is actually the one sending him postcards. He does think wow, how lucky would it be if this just happens to be the right guy? That would be awesome. But logically, he doesn't actually think Kahane is the writer. But why he reaches out to Kahane in the book is because he's hoping in some karma kind of way, reaching out to Kahane and offering him, offering to make his movie. He's hoping that karma, the universe, will stop this other writer from sending him postcards. So he's hoping that him doing this good deed will stop the other guy from doing something against him, if that makes sense. Whereas in the movie, when he picks David Kahane, it seems like he thinks this guy really is the postcard writer. So I don't know what made him think oh, this is the one. But in the movie, he talks to Kahane as if he thinks he is the postcard writer. But anyway, once he picks Kahane, he calls up the number that is, listed. And in the movie, he is standing outside of the Kahane's home and it is a woman inside. And so he's watching her while he's talking to her on the phone. This was not in the book. In the book, he is in his office or at his own house when he calls her up. But anyway, a woman answers. Her name is June. And based on the conversation they have, he finds out that June and Kahane are dating, but that their relationship is on the rocks. And in book and movie, in this conversation, even though it's brief, they both kind of feel a spark between each other as they're talking. But basically, she tells him that Kahane is at the movies right now. So after he hangs up on her, he then goes to the movie theater where Kahane is at. And so he comes into the movie part way, and then afterwards he finds Kahane and starts talking to him and being hey, I met you a while back and I'm curious, to talk about that movie you pitched to me again. And they end up going to a bar and having a few drinks and talking about this. And in the movie, Kahane gets very aggressive and rude. Whereas in the book, he definitely is he's definitely cold to Griffin. But yeah, in the movie, so in both, Kahane leaves the bar first. And in the movie, when Griffin then leaves, he walks past where Kahane is standing and Kahane starts following him and harassing him and just being very aggressive. So that was very different because in the book that was not the case. But yeah, so in the movie, they end up at Kahane's car and Kahane pushes Griffin over this small ledge. And then Kahane jumps over to the ledge to make sure Griffin is okay. And then while he jumps down there, Griffin ends up killing Kahane. Whereas in the book, Griffin follows Kahane. He sees him at his car and he goes up to him and they're talking. And it's like I said, Kahane was cold to him, but he wasn't being aggressive. And so they're just talking. And then Griffin kneels down and he starts taking the air out of Kahane's tires. And then while he is knelt down, he lunges forward at Kahane and tackles him and he ends up killing him. So in the book, this was very unexpected because they're just talking and Kahane is being rude to him and talking about what a jerk he is and whatever, but it still comes out of nowhere. And I was not expecting him to kill Kahane. So that was very surprising. And yeah, again, how it happens in book and movie is different because in the movie, Kahane was just being very aggressive and he even pushed Griffin over that ledge too. Not saying Kahane deserved to be killed, of course, just that whole scene played out differently, but it had the same end result. Anyway, of course, when Kahane's body is found, it is talked about how Griffin was the last person to see him alive because people saw them together at that bar. And so he is brought in for questioning. And then later he finds out when the funeral is. And because he had talked to June, is the name of Kahane's former girlfriend, he decides to go to Kahane's funeral. And June is surprised by this and she's touched because she's wow, you barely knew Kahane. And yet, because you were the last one to see him, you decided to come to the funeral. That's so sweet of you. And in the book, when he goes to the funeral, that's his first time actually seeing June. Whereas in the movie, again, he had been a weird stalker and watching her from outside her house. So he had seen her before. But in the movie, it's June's first time meeting Griffin. But so eventually he like strikes up kind of a relationship with June and they start to talk, and there is like some Hollywood event happening, and in the book he invites Bonnie, but then Bonnie's out of town, so then he asks June to come instead, and June comes with him, so that is like their first date they go on kind of. Whereas in the movie it's different because Bonnie, he like forces her to go out of town, that way he can ask June to come with him. So he was such a jerk to Bonnie, whereas like I said, in the book he asks Bonnie, but she's like just happened to be out of town anyway. But yeah, so he and June begin like seeing each other, and then he asks her to go to Mexico with him. And in the book they actually do go to Mexico, whereas in the movie they're at the airport, and like at the last minute he sees cops there and he's like, you know what, forget Mexico, let's like go to Palm Springs or somewhere like that. But in both, whether it's Mexico or Palm Springs, they have like a good trip and they are intimate for the first time, and they even like start saying I love you. And it's funny because in the book they're in Mexico, like I said, and while they're in Mexico, Griffin, like he just thinks like it's inevitable and he is going to be caught, and he feels bad kind of because he's like, people are going to think that June and I planned this, and so he feels bad that she's going to get caught in the crossfire kind of a thing. But the whole time they're in Mexico, he is just like has this weird sense of calm because he just like knows it's all going to come to an end. While different things are happening, he's thinking about like, oh, once I'm in the inside, I'm gonna tell the other prisoners about this experience and the last woman I was with, and so he's imagining how he'll tell them about it. And of course, because I've seen Shawshank Redemption and this is Tim Robbins, I couldn't help but be like, oh, like in an alternate reality, like the Tim Robbins in Shawshank is the Tim Robbins from The Player who got caught for murder. Anyway, but that was kind of a funny part in the book, the way he was thinking about that. And there were also always like Mexican police nearby watching him. And when they leave Mexico, like no one stops them. They get on the plane and fly away. And he's like, oh, like I kind of wish I would have said bye to the Mexican police officer because like I got so used to seeing him around, like I'm going to miss him now. And yeah, that wasn't in the movie because in the movie they're in Palm Springs, like I said. And we also don't get his like internal monologue. So I don't know if he thought he was going to be arrested, but obviously he had seen police at the airport. So he knew like he was on, dangerous ground. Anyway, but in the movie, he gets a call in Palm Springs and they're like, hey, you need to come down. You need to come down to the station. And so he drives back to Hollywood. Whereas in the book, once they land in Hollywood, or actually he gets a call when he's in Mexico. But basically in both book and movie, he gets back to Hollywood and the cops want him to come to the station to be part of a lineup. However, in the lineup, he is not the one identified. So he leaves and is totally, gets off scot-free. And the police officer in charge, who is played by Whoopi Goldberg, by the way, she definitely thinks like, man, like he's the one, but we just don't have the evidence. And so there's nothing she can do about it because they don't have anything against him and he gets away with it. But then to move on to his job. So in the movie, these writers pitch a movie script called Habeas Corpus. I keep wanting to call him Tim Robbins, but Griffin, he thinks that this script is a dud. And so he has his rival, the guy who is also wanting the promotion. He has that guy take charge of this new script because he's like, this movie is going to be a dud and it will reflect poorly on him. And so I'm going to orchestrate this whole thing so that I can get the promotion. And it seems like it works because then by the end of the movie, the guy just has the same position, whereas Griffin, we see, has gotten the promotion. Whereas in the book, Griffin is actually offered a job at a different studio with a higher position and more pay, so he ends up quitting his current job and moving on to a different one anyway. But the movie Habeas Corpus was very funny in the movie, and it starts out the writer being like, it has a sad ending originally, and the writer is like, I want to keep this ending and I do not want any big name stars, and he's specifically like, no Bruce Willis, this isn't some action movie. However, when they have the screening for it, we have Bruce Willis and Julia Roberts in very funny cameos in this fake movie, and then it has a happy ending at the end. And so Bonnie is in the screening, and after it's over, she turns to the writer and she's like, you totally changed it. Like, you've made these terrible changes to the script. Like, how could you do that? And the writer has already kind of been changed by Hollywood, and he's like, hey, I wanted to make money. I want to be rich, and the way I wrote the script wouldn't make me rich, so he tossed out his morals just like that so he could make money. And Bonnie is very upset by this, and so she kind of makes a scene and she gets fired, and she's like, what? Like, you can't fire me? And so she goes to talk to Griffin to try to convince him to keep her on, I guess. But Griffin is just like so cold-hearted and he won't even talk to her. And so she's left like crying with her broken high heel. And that is how we end with Bonnie. And then Griffin ends up driving home to June, who he is now married to, and she is pregnant. And yeah, Habeas Corpus, it's a little different in the book because in the book, the script did have like the happier ending, I believe, because it has him like shooting out the gas chamber, which is what we see in the movie. And then, yeah, in the end of the book, he is with June as well. But again, Bonnie, like, he treated her so much worse in the movie, because in the book, like I said, she was kind of fizzling on the relationship anyway. And so that whole aspect, like, he was just so much harsher in the movie with her. And then to wrap things up with the postcard writer, of course, so it is different from book to movie. So in the book, he keeps getting the postcards, even after Kahane's death, so clearly his plan didn't work. But at one point he receives a letter from the postcard writer, and in it, the postcard writer is talking about how he was recently talking to a fellow writer friend, and the writer friend was talking about how he had been at some producer's house and Arnold Schwarzenegger had been there. And so then the writer says, meaning the postcard writer says, I found myself trying to tear everyone down as the story was being told, trying to make them less. For example, when my friend described the house, I said, oh, it's his father's house. And my friend said, no, it's his. His father bought it for him, I said. And my friend said, yeah, so what? And that really stopped me. Yeah, so what? The producer was enjoying his life. He was having fun. He wasn't confused. He didn't hate himself. And I thought, why am I torturing this executive? This is the sickest thing I've ever heard of. Why am I jealous of a rich kid whose father bought him a $3 million playpen? My father's helped me out, and that's an advantage over someone who's had to make every dime himself. So I didn't get a movie made. So what? And then he ends saying that he has left Hollywood now and that he will never bother Griffin again. And yeah, I just really liked the way things ended with the writer in the book, where he just, has a sense of peace about things and lets things go. And he's like, you know what? So what? These people who get help from their rich fathers and whatever, like, they're living their life and they're happy. And why should that bother me? I'm going to live my life and be happy, And so we don't always get what we want. Big deal. Keep on living life, make the most of it. Whereas in the movie, it's very different. So in the movie, he's driving home to see June when they get a call, and it's like a conference call. And they're like, oh, this writer has a pitch idea for you. And the writer is pitching a story that is like about Griffin and Kahane and this writer. And so he's basically blackmailing Kahane, but trying to mask it as a movie pitch. And so, yeah, he blackmails, or sorry, did I say Kahane? I meant he's blackmailing Griffin. And so in the end, the writer and Griffin agree to these terms in order for the writer to not tell on Griffin and how he killed Kahane. And in return, Griffin will help this writer get a movie made. But to share some final thoughts. So in the book, there's like a car chase shootout scene between Griffin and the writer, and Griffin's windshield gets like blown out or something. And so in that final letter that he sends Griffin, he includes $1,000, and he's like, oh, and the money, by the way, is for when I blew your windshield out. Sorry about that. And so the fact that the writer has just like done a total 180 and is even like, paying for what he broke when he was angry at Griffin, I don't know. I just found that so funny. But in the movie, there is no shootout drive scene. Instead, there is a scene where Griffin is driving his car and there's a box, and there ends up being a rattlesnake. But also in the book, so the guy in the higher position, and then the guy who is like Griffin's, his competitor or whatever for that job. One is named Levison and the other is Levy. But when I was reading the book, I read it as Levison and Levy. And so their names are very similar. And as I was reading this, and they're both like his coworkers, right? And so I was so confused for like the first chunk of this book, because I thought Levison and Levy were the same person, because I thought Levy was a nickname for Levison, right? That makes sense. But it wasn't until at some point, a quarter of the way in or something, when I was like, oh, like, okay, these are two separate people. But I was like, bad call, having two people whose characters are very similar in some ways, and then you give them these names that are very similar. Whereas in the movie, they pronounce it Levison and Levy, so the pronunciation is different. Plus, you have two different actors playing them. So in the movie, this was not an issue at all. But reading the book, I was kind of confused for the first section of it. And then to move on to book versus movie. So I did like this book a lot. And like I said, there was a lot about it that I found very funny, and it kept me on my toes. It kept me interested. Nonetheless, I have to say the movie wins. It's just very close to the book plot. So it's very faithful. And I love the performances, especially, like I said, Tim Robbins, plus all of the cameos. And it's also like, obviously it's very meta and very tongue in cheek. Like the opening scene are two people talking about how like movies these days are always about the quick cuts. And this was the 90s. We are even more about the quick cuts these days. But anyway, he's saying how like nobody has like long panning shots anymore. And as they're having this conversation, we're getting like this long panning shot. And so I did just enjoy the tongue-in-cheek nature. And Robert Altman, as well as Michael Tolkien, it seems, both have like, their jaded, bitter views towards the Hollywood industry. And so even though this is a very negative, bitter look at it, I just found it very entertaining and I really liked it, and it was very funny. And, I get those like bitter views towards Hollywood too, and they keep making movies that I'm just like, these movies are all the same and they're all so empty and there's like no substance and it's just about the money. And I get people want to make money, but you can tell when a movie is being made where money wasn't the sole focus, and instead the focus is like creating art and doing something you believe in. And when everybody, like there's certain movies where like you can feel that when it's not about the money and it's about them doing something they believe in, you know? And so, yeah, so I get jaded views towards Hollywood as well. And so maybe that's another reason I really liked this. And even though I said that the movie maybe didn't keep my interest as much as the book, like I said, I think that's just because I already knew the plot. But I am looking forward to watching this movie yet again. And like I said, I think I will like it even more on multiple watches. And the book also has multiple scenes where writers are pitching a script to Griffin, and we get this like pitch like in depth, and it gets kind of lengthy at times. Like there's one about a cowboy who dies and he goes to cowboy heaven, but then he comes back to earth to like see a boy who still believes in cowboys. And some of the stories just went on a bit too long, and I was just like, why are we hearing this script right now? Like it doesn't even pertain to the overall plot. So why is this book just going on about this script that doesn't relate? And maybe there was some symbolism in there that I should have been paying more attention to. I'm not sure, but I personally, and that happens like 2 times where it's a script that doesn't really matter. But anyway, so I got kind of tired of those parts personally. But yeah, there is a sequel to this book called Return of the Player, so I am a little curious to read that. It's not like #1 on my TBR, but if I do end up reading it, I will either make a video on Patreon about it, or maybe I'll make a video and release it to the main feed. Not really sure, but I am a little curious to read the sequel. So let me know if you have read the sequel and if it is worth reading. And also let me know your thoughts down below in the comments for this book, for this movie. Let me know your thoughts on Hollywood and if you have a jaded view as well. And yeah, there's just, like, I love movies, and yet I've gone into it before about how there's just so many aspects of it and the studios and everything, and with these strikes going on, and it's so complicated where like you can love movies while at the same time like have such ambivalence about it, right? Anyway, so it is a really interesting topic, I think, too. So yeah, thank you for requesting this, Desirelessness JF, and let me know your thoughts down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you have not already. And I mentioned Shawshank Redemption multiple times, so if you have not yet seen my Shawshank Redemption video, you definitely should. I will link to it here on the screen. And I have covered Mystic River, but that is one that is only available as the audio. But if you want to go back and find that video and listen to my Mystic River episode, that was a really fantastic one too. So definitely check those out, and I will see you next time. Bye.